So, what if a president could commit a crime and just never be held accountable for it? It's a huge question, and it's the very thing the Supreme Court just tackled in a landmark ruling on presidential immunity. Today, we're going to break down exactly what they decided and what it all means for the future of the presidency itself. All right, here's our game plan. We'll start with the big question the court was facing. Then, we'll unpack the brand new three-part test they came up with. We're going to dive into the critical line between official and private acts, see how this decision played out in the real world almost immediately, and we'll wrap up with the massive debate this has sparked about power and accountability in America. For over 200 years, this one giant question about presidential power was just kind of left unanswered by the Supreme Court. Well, this case finally forced them to address it head on. The question itself sounds simple, right? Can a former president face criminal charges for things they did while they were in the Oval Office? But the stakes, they're absolutely enormous. This whole thing pits two fundamental American ideas against each other: the power a president needs to do their job, and the principle that no one, not even the president, is above the law. So you might be thinking, what was the answer? A simple yes or no? Well, on July 1st, 2024, the court said neither. Instead, in a 6-3 decision, the majority created something totally new, a three-part legal test to figure out when a president is immune and when they're not. So let's really dig into this new framework, because the way it's designed is going to shape the limits of presidential power for years, maybe even decades to come. The entire ruling really boils down to the number 3. The court created 3 different categories for a president's actions, and each of these categories gets a different level of legal protection. To really get this case, you've got to understand these 3 tiers. So what are they? Well, they range from complete and total protection all the way down to no protection at all. We've got absolute immunity, presumptive immunity, and no immunity. Let's walk through what each of these steps on this new immunity ladder actually means for a former president. Okay, so think of it like this. The court basically created 3 buckets. The first bucket gives absolute immunity. This is for a president's core constitutional powers, things like granting pardons or vetoing bills, stuff that's right at the heart of the job. The second bucket gives presumptive immunity for other official duties. You can think of this as a really strong shield that's tough but not impossible for a prosecutor to get past. And that last bucket, it offers no immunity at all for anything that's purely private or unofficial. And that right there brings us to the million-dollar question that this whole thing hinges on. Was what the president did official or unofficial? That single distinction is now the crucial dividing line for presidential immunity. So here's the thinking. If an act is official, it gets some serious protection. The whole idea is to let a president govern without constantly fearing a politically motivated lawsuit. But if an act is deemed unofficial or private, that protection just vanishes. Now, what's really important here is that the Supreme Court didn't actually draw that line itself. It kicked that job back down to the lower courts. And this is where the legal theory smacks right into reality. The Supreme Court didn't actually rule on the charges against Trump. Instead, it gave a lower court a massive assignment. Go through all these allegations one by one, things like organizing fraudulent electors or pressing state officials, and figure out for each and every action, was this part of the president's official job or was it private political activity? So what happened next? Well, this ruling didn't stay in the legal textbooks for long. It had immediate, and I mean massive, real-world consequences. This timeline really tells the story. The court issues its ruling on July 1st, setting up this whole new framework. That sent the case back to the lower courts for what would have been a super long fact-finding process. The delay alone meant there was no way a trial could happen before the presidential election. And then on November 25th, after Donald Trump won that election, the special counsel just moved to dismiss the case entirely. As you can probably guess, the political reaction was instant, and it was completely divided. On one side, you had supporters like Senator J.D. Vance calling it a huge win for the rule of law, arguing that this was a necessary shield to protect all future presidents from purely political prosecutions. But the other side saw it in a totally different light. Critics, including Justice Sotomayor in her really fiery dissent, argued the ruling did the exact opposite, that it risked making the president into a king above the law. And this gets us right to the heart of the debate that's still going on, this fundamental tension between presidential power and public accountability that this ruling has just thrown into the spotlight. The main argument from the 3 dissenting justices was that the majority basically invented a new kind of immunity out of thin air. They argued that it creates a kind of law-free zone around a president's actions,
a zone that they say has no foundation in the text of the Constitution or in American legal history.
The dissenters spelled out their fears very clearly. They warned that this ruling could chip away at that core principle that no one is above the law. They worried it might even encourage future presidents to abuse their power, weaken our whole system of checks and balances, and just generally make it extremely difficult to ever prosecute a president in the future. And so, at the end of the day, this ruling leaves all of us with a profound and still very much unsettled question for the future of American democracy. Where do we as a nation draw the line between protecting the power a president needs to actually function effectively and the foundational principle that the office should never, ever be placed above the law itself? That is the debate this landmark case has left for all of us to consider.